So the Kansas City Royals' first 7 years from 1969 to 1975 were basically what you'd expect from an expansion team, but also it was somewhat better than most expansion teams, as outside of their first 2 seasons, they were pretty competitive in the rest. And then finally in 1976, the team would make the playoffs for the first time, and from that period all the way to 1985, the team would make the playoffs 7 times, winning 2 pennants and a World Series championship. But after that 1985 championship, the team would go on an almost 30-year playoff drought, which saw a lot of losing seasons, and in that span, they only won more than 90 games once. But there's one season where the playoff streak could have ended even earlier, a surprising season, might I add, which is 2003. This Royals team is weird because when you look at their previous seasons before and the seasons they had after this, it's kind of an outlier, as in 2002, the Royals were coming off their first ever 100-loss season as a franchise. They had Tony Pena as their new manager. This was his first full season there, and expectations were kind of low. But somehow, someway, this team found a way to win 83 games, and even though they didn't make the playoffs, it was kind of almost like a wow, maybe the Royals are back. Until having 3 straight 100-plus loss seasons from 2004 to 2006, which makes you go, what happened this season that made the Royals actually competitive, playing meaningful games in September? Well, let's just kind of go over what happened and take a look and why they crumbled off in the end. March 31st, 2003, opening day against the White Sox at home. It was Mark Buehrle versus, of all people, Run Elvis Hernandez. And of course, it was Run Elvis Hernandez that pitched a shutout, not Mark Buehrle, and the Royals got off to a 3-0 victory. And then the Royals just kept winning, and winning, and winning, and winning, until their streak to start the season undefeated got to 9-0. To this day, that is the second best undefeated start in MLB history, only behind the 1987 Brewers and the 2023 Tampa Bay Rays, who both started 13-0 to begin the season. To put it into perspective, their division rival, the Detroit Tigers, this year started 0-9, the complete opposite of what the Royals were doing. However, it is safe to say that their season was a roller coaster. They actually started 16-3 at one point, before falling to 28-29, but that would be the furthest the Royals ever got to under 500 on the season, as after that, they would be at or over 500 for the rest of the year, and they found themselves 51-41 at the All-Star break, actually leading their division by 7 games. Now, who is on this team that is making them so good? Well, they actually did have some boppers in the lineup. I mean, Ken Harvey was actually a pretty solid first baseman. They had Raul Ibanez, who at this time was only 31 years old, have a nice season, and Mike Sweeney was also a great DH. Oh yeah, and this team had center fielder Carlos Beltran on there, who was obviously their best player, so that also helps that you have him on there. But that's the thing about this team. The offense was good and pretty much carried the team, because when you go and look at the pitching, there's not a lot to be desired here. They're not necessarily ace because he didn't start the season, but their best starting pitcher throughout the year was 31-year-old Darrell May, who won 10 games, had a 3.77 ERA, and pitched in 210 innings. But he was the only starter on the Royals that year that pitched over 100 innings, as the only other pitcher to reach that mark was relief pitcher Jeremy Adfeld, who pitched 126 innings. However, he did have 36 total games, 18 in the bullpen and 18 as a starter, so I guess you can say he was one of just 2 Royals starters that year to hit the 100 inning mark, but since it was kind of half and half, you don't necessarily want to count it. Their so-called ace pitcher, Run Elvis Hernandez, went 7-5 with a 4.61 ERA. Jose Lima, who was 30 at this point, went 8-3 with a 4.91, and everybody else was just kind of bad. But most of the time when you see these playoff teams or these competing playoff teams have not necessarily good rotations or bad rotations, it's usually the bullpen that helps, right? Well, about that, Mike McDougal was their closer. He had 27 saves. His ERA was over 4, but he wasn't terrible, and that was about it again. DJ Carrasco, Jason Grimsley, Chris Wilson, Jim Gobble, they weren't all that great, even though Jim Gobble wasn't in the bullpen, but he's another one of those starters where you just go, wait, he was on on here. They tried to throw out the likes of Paul Abbott, Brian Anderson, Miguel Acino, and it just seemed like nothing worked pitching-wise, and for a team that was so good at hitting, they were 4th in the league in batting average, their pitching ended with a 5.05 ERA, good for 12th out of the, at the time, 14 American League teams. And you can definitely tell that's what held them back from being absolutely great. But as the season went along, an 82-74 record turned into 83-79, and they let the Minnesota Twins come back and win the division. And of course, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, in what many people thought would be the turnaround season for the Royals, this is where they start picking things up. They would have 3 straight 100-loss seasons after this, and the guy Carlos Beltran the next season would get traded to the Houston Astros before signing a big deal with the New York Mets the following off season. The Royals would endure another almost decade of bad seasons before 2013, when they actually started to show that they cared a little bit, finished with a winning record, still missing the playoffs, but nonetheless a vast improvement. And they showed that year wasn't a fluke, as in 2014 they got the American League wild card, clinching their first playoff spot in 29 years, getting all the way to the World Series where they would lose in 7 to the San Francisco Giants. But fear not, Royals fans, because the very next year, in 2015, the team won 95 games, winning the AL Central, and this time winning the World Series, their first in 30 years.
The 1-2 again.
But again, after that season, they started going back into that mode of, oh, we're a cheap team, so it's time to rebuild again. And since then, they've had 3 more 100-loss seasons. However, 2024 is looking on the up and up as the Royals actually spent money this offseason, paid their superstar Bobby Witt Jr., and are looking to, start winning again at this point. But hey, that's just baseball for you, and that's what makes it fun. Sometimes it's better to expect the unexpected than to, keep expecting the same thing over and over, because for the most part, it's basically the same in every sport. You always get that one Cinderella team, the team that comes out of nowhere to compete, that nobody gave a chance to do anything, that we just kind of don't see coming. So what do you think about the Royals in 2003? Were they a team that could have kept going? Were they just one of those teams that maybe the hot start carried them to the season that they had? Or was it much more than that? Royals fans who were around that time, I would really like to hear what you have to say about it below. But until then, that's it for me. Stay safe out there, and let's get ready for the 2024 Major League Baseball season.